Hi, I'm Chris Sarandon, and welcome to Cooking by Heart, where we revisit the vivid memories of the food we grew up with.
I couldn't believe the tastes and the flavors.
And the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives.
I was the one sort of like mommy dearest.
My guest today is Ed Begley Jr. Ed first came to audiences' attention for his portrayal of Dr. Victor Ehrlich in the long-running hit television series St. Elsewhere, for which he received 6 Emmy nominations. Ed has recently appeared in the film Amsterdam with Christian Bale and Margot Robbie, Book Club with Diane Keaton, Candice Bergen, and Mary Steenburgen, and can also be seen in a number of Christopher Guest's films such as A Mighty Wind, Best in Show, and For Your Consideration. On television, Begley can be seen on Young Sheldon, Modern Family, Better Call Saul, in which he's just amazing, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and has also had recurring roles in 6 Feet Under, Arrested Development, and Portlandia. Ed has starred in David Mamet's play November at the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles, and has appeared in several other David Mamet plays. He's written several books, most recently being his extraordinary memoir, To the Temple of Tranquility and Step on It. He lives in a solar-powered home and drives an electric car. Please welcome Ed Begley Jr. Hi, Ed.
Chris, it's so good to be with you again.
Oh,
it's been a while.
Yeah, we haven't seen each other in a long time. And by the way, I live in a not totally solar-powered house. I'm aiming for that. And I have a plug-in hybrid, so another degree of separation.
Another reason to love you, Chris, and I have many.
So the way I usually start the program, Ed, is that we talk provenance. And your provenance is somewhat complicated. That is where you're from, but also family background. So let's get into that a little bit before we kind of get into the food end of it. You were born in L.A., right?
Yeah, Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital.
Right, but then you moved to Buffalo?
I went 1 year to school near Buffalo in Niagara Falls, quite specifically Lewiston, New York.
Yeah.
Quite near the falls. And but before that, I went to school out in Long Island. So I was born in L.A., came every summer back to the San Fernando Valley, near where I was born, and then finally moved back where I came from in '63. So but I was an early bi-coastal type, I suppose. My dad would be doing some Broadway shows. I'd be there for that part of the school year, go back and do a movie or TV show in Hollywood. So we went back and forth and had the luxury of 2 homes, both of them small, 1,700 square foot, 2 big homes. But we had that luxury of a house out in Long Island, in Merrick, New York, and a house in the San Fernando Valley.
Right.
I didn't appreciate it at the time, I can promise you, though.
Oh, well, none of us do.
Right.
And especially when we go back, I don't know about you, but have you been back to either of or visited either of your homes in your older years?
I have. It's extraordinary to see how small they were. And
exactly.
Yeah, it wasn't much at all of a home, but it was beautiful. I loved every moment of it, of course.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a matter of scale anyway.
Yes.
You weren't 6'4" when you were living there.
That's right. I thought it was such a long walk to the Long Island Railroad from our house there on Lincoln, just below Merrick Road. It's, maybe an 8-minute walk tops.
Right.
It was nothing. And I thought, oh my God, what a slog.
The peripatetic Ed Begley Jr., even at that age. Now, what's your first memory of sitting around the dinner table with your family?
My first memory was when the extended family would come by for a visit. By that, I mean my Uncle Martin or my Aunt Helene, Aunt Bertha. We would all get together and there'd be some sort of a traditional American meal. It'd be like a pot roast and vegetables and stuff like that. And it was so great. And the same with the holidays. There'd be holiday food, but I didn't realize what it was I liked so much. And of course, I liked the food. The food was usually pretty good, but I liked, the family, to have all those people together. That's what's great about Christmas. It's really not getting the gift. You think it's getting the train set or all of that.
Yeah.
And that's a moment of fun. but to be there with your family is what's great about any of the holidays.
The
and
fellowship.
of course, the food.
Yep.
The food is integral to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, who did the cooking on a daily basis, first of all?
At first, it was my mother, Amanda, the woman I thought to be my mother, turned out to be my stepmother. She died when I was 7. She cooked a bit.
Fascinating story.
Yeah. She was not a good cook at all, but it was okay. It wasn't horrible food. It just wasn't great. Mm-hmm. And then our good fortune, my sister and I, a woman came in when we were starting to head the wrong way as young people. I was 7, my sister was 8. We were carrying around paring knives from the kitchen, and not to dice something up in prep. We were carrying them around for defense or I don't know what, but we were carrying knives around. I don't know.
What? You were, was this in play?
We would carry them to school. We'd carry them around in our pockets for a while.
You're kidding.
I don't know what the inciting incident. We somehow thought we needed knives in our pockets to protect ourselves. And there was some crazy things going on, that's for sure. But then our good fortune, and now the story begins about cooking. Mm-hmm. This woman, Jeanette Pierre from Alsace-Lorraine, came and became the housekeeper that also watched my sister and I, as a nanny, I suppose. We were 7 and 8.
This is after your stepmom passed away.
Exactly. She came into our lives, and she was a great cook. She made crepes on Friday. Friday was always a great day because you make crepes and make those other more traditional dishes, like some sort of meat dish and well done, not by well done, I don't mean overcooked, but vegetables that were well prepared. Right. She was a good cook, and she was, she wasn't drunk, which some of the other caregivers were. They were pretty loaded.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they'd fall into a ditch, and my sister and I'd have to pick her up out of the ditch off Merrick Road there. My Aunt Bertha, that was always a trip. So we had an odd experience till about 7 or 8 with some of the caregivers, but then it got really good with this woman, Jeanette Pierre. She was a peach.
For our listeners and our viewers, can you give us just a sort of a snippet background in terms of the fact that you believed that this woman that you had been, Amanda, correct?
Yes.
Had been, it was your mother. And,
yes.
And suddenly one day she was no longer your mother, she was your stepmother. What happened?
Well, she passed away when I was 7, but prior to that, the first 7 years of my life, I called her mommy.
Right.
And she called me Eddie and said, "This is my son, Eddie," when we'd meet people on the street. So I had no reason to disbelieve that she was my mother. But when I became old enough to get a learner's permit for a driver's license in California, I suddenly had in my hands for the first time, I had my birth certificate. And so I opened it up on the way to the DMV to look at it. My dad was driving, and I saw the page before me and went, "Dad, why is there no mother's name on my birth certificate?" And he said, "Amanda wasn't your mother. That was a woman I thought to be my mother, died when I was 7.
Yeah, right.
It's like, wow, okay, wow.
Jesus.
Okay.
Just
well, who was my mother?
Sitting in a car with your father.
Driving to the DMV with
you look at your birth certificate, and that's the first moment you had any inkling?
Yeah, I had none whatsoever. I had never held that document before.
Wow.
I didn't expect any surprises. I just wondered if it was written. I was born in 1949. Was it written on parchment with a quill? Didn't have one of those little baby footprints, so we didn't get switched at birth. Yep. I wanted to just look at it, and the mother's name is blank, probably because of the scandal, because my father was married to Amanda, but had 2 children, not 1, but 2, my sister and I, with this woman who is a page at NBC. So, there it is.
There it is.
But I didn't understand any of this at the time. Suddenly this woman, I said, "Who is or was my mother?" And he said, "Sandy's your mother." And then
you knew her. You knew Sandy.
Knew her and had great affection for her. There's something about this woman my sister and I loved a lot. My sister even one day walked away from the bus stop to go to school out in Long Island. Well, the bus was coming. She's walking towards the Long Island Railroad. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to go see Sandy." She got on the train. She bullshitted away onto the train.
Wow.
And got to Grand Central Station and started asking commuters where Sandy was. We had seen her so many times there to get a Christmas gift or an Easter basket. We thought she lived there.
Mm-hmm.
And I then eventually got to know her after my father's passed, and she was quite a woman. She was extraordinary, actually.
But prior to that, it was your stepmom, the woman who was your stepmom,
Right.
who did the cooking. And then when she passed away, was it a variety of caregivers who, and then you ended up with a woman from Alsace?
Yes, exactly. A variety of caregivers. Some of them were okay. Some of them were drunk. Some of them were very mean and physically abusive. We had to, one housekeeper was such, we had to go cut our own switch out in the backyard. You go cut a switch, I'm going to hit you. I'm going to hit you with.
What?
And you didn't want to get one too small. The beating would go on a little bit longer. So
oh my God.
It was kind of crazy. It was that's probably why we were carrying paring knives. I finally just, the penny just dropped now.
You've put it together right now, and you don't have to pay me. You don't have to pay me for the therapy.
I'll get a couch here in a moment and just lay down and give the rest of the interview.
I've got a cushy chair, so that'll
deserve
have to serve. So can you remember any of the other specifically Alsatian dishes that this woman, this caretaker, made for you? What was her name again?
Jeanette Pierre.
Jeanette.
From Alsace-Lorraine, and she was part of the French resistance, and she had to hide her brother, Charlie, like under the floorboards whenever the Gestapo came by and what have you in Alsace-Lorraine there during those years, because he was a more prominent figure in the resistance than her.
Oh.
But she was quite a woman. She was wonderful. She was a great influence on our life, and I'm lucky to have had her, for those important 5 years from 7 to 12. Those are key years in a young person's life. You set a lot of tones for what's going to happen the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
And she set the tone, and it was a good one.
Do you remember any other specific dishes that she made besides crepes?
Yeah,
that were French?
She'd make hot dogs one day, or she'd make, pork chops. She'd make, back then I was quite a meat eater. I became a vegetarian years later, but back then I loved my meat, as most kids did. And, I eat a lot of whatever they had. I liked. Somehow I didn't like, I think it was pot roast, actually. I just thought it was overcooked, and it probably was.
It was,
Yeah.
By definition.
And so I didn't like pot roast, but I loved the steak. I'd go with my dad to restaurants, and I'd always order the most expensive thing I could find, because my dad was paying, lobster Cantonese, I seem to remember getting a lot. We didn't get that at home, of course.
Right.
But we go to Chinese restaurants and get this and that.
Did you often go out to eat with your dad?
We did. Before Jeanette, and when Jeanette, after she left, we'd go out to eat a lot with my dad. He didn't cook, and the stepmothers didn't cook really. They'd cook a bit, but they didn't cook much. So it was a lot of eating out after that. But we were very lucky. My dad was a successful actor, and he got more successful, as I got older.
Right.
And so we'd go out to nice restaurants. But at home, I guess the best cooking I had is those Jeanette Pierre years. She was cooking some good food and vegetables that were not overcooked. That was a key thing. It got me to finally like vegetables, because they were different than the ones cooked for me before. They were not overcooked, and they had nice flavor on them. They weren't just boiled till their death. They were somewhat al dente, and they had more flavor and had some seasoning on them that was appropriate.
And
she was a good cook.
Sauces as well.
Exactly. Yeah. She could have been a saucier. She really had some skills.
Do you remember, you mentioned a little earlier about holiday meals with the family. Do you remember those meals? And any highlights?
That would often be a turkey.
Yes.
That would be a turkey and all that.
Whatever the holiday?
A turkey was very normal for the holidays, yes. Christmas, it'd be a turkey. Thanksgiving, of course, it'd be a turkey. And but the Sunday was kind of the big meal of the week. And that would usually be a pot roast, which I didn't like. Or lamb. I didn't like the smell of lamb cooking.
A lot of people,
I suppose it tasted okay.
Yeah. A lot of people feel that way about lamb, and it's interesting. A lot of it has to do, of course, with the age of the lamb, and whether it's gotten into mutton, or if it's young spring lamb, then it has a much more delicate taste. When you were going to school, was lunch packed for you, or did you have lunch at school?
I had a lunchbox, and what I really liked was a bologna sandwich. That was great. Peanut butter and jelly was fine. Once she packed some hot dogs and put them, Jeanette made some hot dogs and put them in my lunchbox. That was a big day to get hot dogs to take to lunch. That was extraordinary.
Was there any kind of health consciousness that was involved in her cooking, or was it basically...
There was. Yes, healthy just in that she didn't use too much. She put butter on things and what have you, and stuff, sauces occasionally. but she never put too much of it. It was always in the general category of healthy.
What was it like around the dinner table, particularly when your dad was around?
My father was kind of, he was the alpha male in the group, and
right.
The stories would often be about him and the TV show he had just done, or the radio show he had done, or the film he was working on, or the stage play. And I loved it. I wasn't like, oh, I don't want to talk about that again. I wanted to talk about it a lot because I wanted to be an actor, yet I had no idea what was involved in becoming an actor and the work that it takes to become such.
What about your sister?
She wanted to be an actress as well. We both got headshots and we went out on interviews.
From what age?
I started going out on interviews somewhere around age 10 or 11.
Oh.
But I'll tell you now, I'll share with you now what I was thinking. Thank God I never said it. My dad would have whacked me one. But I was thinking for years. I went out on all these interviews. First of all, how did that happen? Who got me an interview to read for the understudy in 1,000 Clowns, the Barry Gordon role? I went and read for it. I didn't get it, of course, because I had no training. I went in there and thought, I'm charming. Give me the part. Dad, get me a Gunsmoke. Get me a Wagon Train. I want to be on Perry Mason. I never uttered those words. As I said, I would have gotten the back of a hand.
Yeah.
I literally thought, A, my dad could pick up the phone and do that, which he could not. I didn't know he didn't have that power. And B, if he had the power to do that, would I have appreciated it one iota? Of course not. I wouldn't have appreciated it. I finally started to train and take some classes, and no big shockaroo. After that, I started to work.
Right. But at 10 years old?
10 years old, I went on some interviews, commercials, and different. I remember quite distinctly reading for the Barry Gordon role, the kid role in 1,000 Clowns with Jason Robard on Broadway.
Right.
I was sure I was going to get it too, because I just knew I was fantastic. I can't imagine what I did in that room.
I'm sure you probably know him or know of him. Clint Howard?
Yes, I do know Clint Howard.
You know Clint, well. I'm sure. You know that he and Ron, his brother Ron, who is now director and has been director for a number of years, were out and working when they were, 5, 6, 7 years old. They're very, very young.
Right.
The stories are so similar, except for the fact that you knew that your father was not necessarily going to be the helping hand in getting you where you needed to go.
Right.
Their father, you're probably aware of this, was a child actor whisperer.
Rance.
He was extraordinary with children in terms of training them and working with them. And they had a very sort of normal existence at home. But when they were on sets, their dad was like the coach, and he ran lines with them, and it was great. But there was a real separation in their lives between their professional life and their home life.
I'd forgotten that. I heard that story, heard that fact years ago, and had totally forgotten it till you just jogged my idle memory.
Yeah.
I've worked with Rance. I know him a bit.
Yes, Rance.
I know Clint.
Right.
I know
the father.
Wonderful fellow.
Yep.
Lovely man. Lovely actor.
Now, as you're growing up, okay, from the time you're 7, 8, 10 years old, all the way through your 10 years, you're exposed to a certain kind of, and I have this a lot with the guests that I talk to, where either the food at home is sort of pedestrian, kind of everyday, cooked meat, overcooked vegetables, potatoes, what have you, except for, of course, Jeanette, who awakened your taste buds, as it were.
100%.
Right. Were there any other great food discoveries that you had when you were growing up? Anything that you said, oh my God?
There was a men's club called the Lambs Club. They had a restaurant there. We would occasionally eat there with my dad. Wait a minute, this is different than the food I'm getting at home. There's more, I don't know what it was, tarragon or basil or something in the recipe that people didn't have the time or care to put in the pasta at home. And I started it's possible to do something else with food rather than just serve it up, with a ladle, and because it's now the timer says it's cooked enough, and then add another 5-10 minutes after that, just to be safe. God forbid it should have any texture to it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I started to realize there was something else to it. And eventually I became interested in cooking myself and became a fairly good cook. I love to cook, and I cook to this day, and I really enjoy it.
At what age did you start cooking yourself?
I didn't start cooking. I started cooking just like a pork chop and, bird's eye vegetable rice medley or something at home. I started cooking that sort of thing when I first moved out of the house. I'd get, 2 or 3 pork chops, put it in the freezer in my little apartment, and some frozen peas with vegetables, bird's eye or green giant or something like that. That would be my meal, and I thought that was just great. And then I met a guy, and I don't think I've talked about this ever in an interview. I'm just because you're jogging the food part of it in a wonderful way.
That's my job.
In my added memory, there's a guy, Mark Lebovitz, a wonderful friend of mine. He passed away a few years ago, but he was a good cook himself, a very good cook, and he hired a guy that was an even better cook to open this restaurant. And he asked that I become an investor, and I did. Put some money into it. It's called the Naked Lunch on Ventura Boulevard.
I remember the Naked Lunch.
Yes, it was in the 70s.
Yeah. He
had it all backwards. The kitchen was huge, given the ratio to the amount of seating. It could maybe seat 12 people at the most, 14.
Obviously not a veteran of the restaurant business.
No. He had it the wrong. It should have been the other way around to make do in a small kitchen. Yeah. He didn't do that, but he was a great guy. And I was learning just by being in the restaurant to help out occasionally how to make a good pea soup and how to do this in a pressure cooker. I'd never heard of a pressure cooker. I never owned a wok. I didn't know about different oils and how they react with foods differently and how they react with heat. And I started to cook a bit, and I had a few dishes that I made in my 20s. And then in my 30s, I began to cook a little bit more. And in my 40s, when it really began, I began to really cook a lot of different dishes. A lot being, I have maybe 20, 30 recipes that are crowd pleasers.
Now, was this coincidental with your being in a relationship, or was this when you were on your own?
My first wife, Ingrid, terrific lady, mother of my 2 grown kids, she cooked a bit, but her dream meal was like a steak, a big chunk of tomato, and some cottage cheese. That was her dream meal.
Yeah.
I didn't eat steak. I was a vegetarian at that point, but I would eat chicken. I kind of met in the middle one day. I was a vegetarian when we met. I went, let's meet halfway. I'll have some chicken occasionally in the 70s when we were married. So she'd make like a tarragon chicken, what have you, and it was pretty good. So I ate that, and then later went back to being a vegetarian, indeed even went vegan after that first marriage ended.
Now, you're not reluctant to talk about this because you talk about it a lot in your book, your memoir, and that is that along this time in your life when you first moved out of the house, when you were on your own, you were in the thrall of alcohol and to a certain extent, whatever drugs were around, recreational drugs.
Correct.
Did that have an effect on your culinary habits at all? That is, would you go to places just for drinks and the food happened to be a part of it, or would you go someplace for the food and drink?
I would go to a place for the food, but I love the ambiance. Besides loving the food and the ambiance, I really liked that there were like-minded people that would go and smoke a joint out back with me, or even go into the wine room, hit the little buzzer up high, that would lock the wine room at Tana's restaurant.
Oh, really?
Go in the back there and do a couple of bumps of cocaine. This was the 70s, and so even if the maitre d' Guido would come in or one of the waiters catch you doing that, none of us were the type of people that would steal a bottle of champagne or wine. It was our local restaurant, Tana's, so nobody was taking any wine out of that locked area, but we'd go in there and do cocaine brazenly. Sometimes even do it at the table at Tana's. That was the 70s.
Wow.
They started to frown on that behavior probably in the 80s.
Right.
When things changed. It was just say no to drugs, Nancy Reagan, just say no and all that. And I'd gotten sober in 79. So I think me and everybody else stopped going into the wine room at Tana's to do drugs. I'm not implying that Dan Tana, the owner, knew of this or anything. No, I don't think he would have sanctioned it.
Right, nor was he procuring in any way. No
way. But this was just something that some of the customers did, and the employees back in those days, the mid-70s. And that's the way it was on the set of many movies, too.
Yep.
People were not shocked to see somebody do cocaine or smoke a joint on a set. Indeed, there were many sets I was on and be like, wow, are you a narc or something? Why wouldn't you smoke a joint with me? People, if you didn't smoke a joint or do a couple of bumps with somebody, like, what's wrong with that character? When I got sober, I thought, I was never going to work again because people wouldn't like that I wouldn't.
Right.
That's how far gone.
Checking you to see if you're wired.
Exactly. I was really, I drank a quart of vodka nearly every day and did a lot of drugs and operated a vehicle. So how I didn't kill anybody is kind of shocking.
I mean, you had a couple of run-ins with cars and
many. Oh, I hit a lot of cars. Don't let me confuse anybody.
Yes,
I didn't. I never got arrested for,
never got a
driving.
DUI in all those years.
Shocking. The one time they did definitely get me when I was drinking. I wasn't rip-roaring drunk that particular night. I'd only had about 8 beers, but I was drunk.
Only 8 beers.
They had me try to walk. Yeah, just 8 beers, Chris. That's all.
I mean,
but for me, that was a night of I'm on the wagon with 8 beers.
Some of the stories in the book about the consumption that took place during those years is just staggering in many ways. I mean,
and staggering is what I was that night, being asked to walk the line by the sheriff's department on Larrabee. If you remember Larrabee Street, it's like Lombard Street in San Francisco. It's and I had me walk sideways on it, and so I was a little stumbly from the angle of the street. But by the time I so ingratiated myself with the sheriff's department guys, I was like, I reach around back with the cuffs on and open up. Back then they had a door latch in the back. I reach around like this and open the latch myself. I just want to help you guys out doing the fingerprints. I was making jokes and what have you. By the time they charged me, it was not drunk driving, which is why they stopped me and they cuffed me and took me in. They thought I had been drinking, and I had. I was charged with making an illegal left-hand turn, reckless driving. It wasn't even a drunk. I never got a DUI, but as I write in the story that happened Christmas Eve, where I run into all these cars next to a sheriff's department guy and go home, not only did they let me, they didn't arrest me, which they should have, but they let me get in my car and drive home. It was just kind of an old boy network back then in every way. Mind-boggling. They were being nice to me. I don't mean to criticize these people that were doing me a favor back then, but they weren't, I said, I live a few blocks from here, guys. I'm just going to drive home, okay?
Wow.
Okay, get home real quick, Ed. Be careful driving.
Also, during this time when you were sort of coming up and initially working your way into becoming a full-time actor, you had other jobs, right?
I did. I was a carpenter for a while. I made furniture. I made a table for my friend Helena Callignotes. And that was one of the things that spurred the interest of one Marlon Brando, who lived next door to Helena. He had heard I had made a table and saw it. So he went, this is a guy I want to talk to. And I got welcomed into Marlon Brando's sphere, not because of my acting, I can promise you, but because of my cabinetry skills. And let me be crystal clear. I'm no Bill Macy. I'm no Harrison Ford. I'm not a master carpenter like those two guys. They're real master carpenters. I'm like a tenth of that. But I could make furniture and made a chest of drawers I'm looking at now, made my dining room table. Back in the 80s, I made a fair amount of stuff for myself and some friends and some people who paid me to make them things.
But you also worked in the crafts in the movie business as well, didn't you?
I did. I was an assistant cameraman for a while. When I did my first job in 1967, which was the show My Three Sons, I was, just waiting for the phone to ring off the hook, and that didn't happen. There was no second job that came quickly.
Right.
So I wanted to work in films and television and even commercials. So I got certified as an assistant cameraman. But from the skills I got going to Valley College, I got in the NABET Camera Union, National Association of Broadcasting Engineers and Technicians. And I got into that union, and I started working a lot as a cameraman. It was good work that paid well. So I thought I gratefully thought that's my lot in life.
That's your future.
This, I'm working.
Right.
And then Room 222 kind of pulled me back into acting. And then I started working even more after that.
Now, I'll jump around here because you just mentioned Marlon Brando and the fact that he lived near you.
Yeah, he lived up the hill, near Coldwater and Mulholland. Yeah, that's where he lived. I lived down at the bottom of Coldwater, basically.
Right. You tell a wonderful story in the book about electric eels.
Yes.
What the hell was that all about?
I'm still trying to entirely figure it out, but what happened was I got a call from one day. I'd been going up there for a while at this point, but I quickly surmised, correctly as it turns out, that he didn't want to talk about acting. He really didn't.
Yeah.
Or directing.
Right.
Or, film editing or puppetry or claymation or interpretive dance. He didn't want to talk about the arts at all.
Right.
He wanted to talk about drywall, copper pipe versus, steel galvanized pipe, solar panels, wind turbines.
Mm-hmm.
So one day, things change. I got a message from him on my answer machine. Ed the Bagel is bran flakes. He would actually, say that. He called me Ed the Bagel, called himself bran flakes. There's a project I want to do with you. I've got the financing. We have distribution. Get up here. Let's get cracking on this. This is going to be a whole nother chapter. You heard what I just said. He's got financing, he has distribution. He wants to work with me. He wants to talk about acting. I was just waiting, biding my time till this moment came. And I raced up there and sat down to hear about the project, maybe see a script. And he says to me, do you know how many volts an electric eel puts out? Wasn't where I thought the conversation was going to go, Chris.
No.
I said, no, I don't really, a couple hundred volts, but not a lot of current, because it's, it's an eel. It's kill itself.
Exactly.
So he said, yeah, you're right, of course, but not entirely correct. It's 200 volts at half an amp. What's the name of the town down the coast? What's the name of the town down the coast? Can you be more specific? You mean Long Beach, Seal Beach, Huntington Beach, La Jolla? La Jolla, that's it. I've got a friend in La Jolla at the Scripps Institute. He's going to give me about 75 of them. We're going to put 75 what? Electric eels. What is this, like a moat where you're going to try to keep people off your property with electric eels and other dangerous creatures? What are you talking about? I said, no, we're going to get the power from the electric eels. We're going to run the whole house.
Well,
Marlon, how are you going to harness the power from the electric eels? Harness being an appropriate word in this case, like a little cartoon seahorse with a harness, with a saddle on it. You're going to have something attached to the eel with wires going to it. It'll get tangled up in the first 5 minutes. The eel swimming around.
75 of them. Right.
Exactly. No, don't be an idiot, Ed. For God's sake, he took 2 spoons in his hands and said, you put an anode and a cathode into the water and you get as much power. I said, you're not going to get enough to run a hobbyist light bulb at a science fair. Yeah. It doesn't work like that. So I'd said no to some of the things before, and so I thought I'd gone too far. He went, why is everything no with you? You won't say yes to anything, for God's sake. What about that wind turbine? He had a plan for my wind turbine. He was going to put a giant cone in front of it, like a hearing horn. Hey, what's that, Sonny? Giant cornucopia with the end cut off in front of my wind turbine. And then it became like that, the Stonehenge design from Spinal Tap, with the drawing, the size of the drawing, the scale. I said, is that built to scale? Yes, it is. I said, well, the horn you're going to put in front of the funnel you're going to put in front of my wind turbine would be thousands of pounds, cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and it'll tear the wind turbine down because they're not designed for that kind of wind speed.
Oh.
And but he finally did come up with some great ideas and got a patent for them. Deep ocean water cooling and other things. Wasn't all crazy stuff. He had some great ideas and technologies like deep ocean water cooling that are used to this day in resorts.
Wow.
Yeah, he had a patent attorney that was standing by for all these different things he had planned.
Yes. I hope the patent attorney disabused him of the electric eels as you did.
He did, thank God.
Yeah. Now, I'm also interested in, you mentioned that you became a vegetarian fairly young.
I did.
When you were relatively young. What was the reason for it? Did it have to do with the morality of killing animals to feed human beings, or was it the environmental impact of raising animals for food?
It was a mix of several of those things. I was 20 years old. It was 1970. It was April. It was the first Earth Day, actually. And somebody had showed me one of those slaughterhouse films. And I got turned off to it. I just got turned off to meat. And I thought, let me eat, see how I like just eating vegetables. I always kind of like vegetables, but I thought, let's see if I can eat just vegetables. And I started to cook that way, and I liked it. And then I had heard, because of people that were there at the first Earth Day, it's better, it's less water and less land and energy to grow a pound of
it's
broccoli
amazing.
than it is a pound of beef.
Yeah.
And so I started doing that, and it wasn't like the old days where you could only get vegetables part time in the year. You can be living in Fairbanks, Alaska, and get broccoli and tofu dogs in the middle of winter. The world is a different place now. It certainly was in the 1970s. So I tried it and liked it, but then I wasn't getting enough protein, so I became a pescatarian for a while there, and ate that way, and then finally but I was a vegetarian for quite a while, starting in 1970, became a vegan in 1992, and now I'm not a vegan, I'm a megan, but that I eat mostly vegan.
Okay. All right. Now, you've been married twice. You
Yes.
mentioned that Ingrid, your first wife, was not if we want to call it an adventurous cook.
Right.
What about Rochelle?
She'll eat anything. She's an omnivore.
Yeah. And does she cook?
No, she does not cook. I do the cooking in the house.
Ah,
I mean, she can make a salad and she can make a few things. If I'm not here, she'll make herself some pasta.
right.
Put some chicken in a pan or something. But
Right.
I'm more the cook in the family. I've got some nice recipes that are crowd pleasers.
And what do you do about protein with your vegan diet?
What I used to do was I'd have, like tofu and peanut butter and avocado and cashews and soybeans. And, I kind of go around the circle of plant-based stuff.
Right.
Flaxseed oil is very good for omega-3, and I ate that way. But then I developed a serious condition. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I have Parkinson's. And
Right.
so the doctor said, you got to meet me halfway and have some more omega-3 on a regular basis. Maybe have a piece of fish once in a while. So I do that now. That's why I'm not strictly a vegan.
Mm-hmm.
I eat mostly vegan, but I make sure and get the protein I need to not have the Parkinson's get any worse.
Right. Now it's interesting because I have coming up at the end of May a live podcast at a theater near where I live with Alice Waters, and Alice.
She's wonderful.
Oh, is an extraordinary woman. But we were having a conversation about back in the 70s, particularly in the 80s, when becoming a vegetarian became more, if not mainstream, it was certainly more accepted, and that you could find food that was that you could sustain yourself on at that time. And we were talking about a great cookbook that was the sort of, to me, the seminal cookbook when I became a vegetarian for a while, called Diet for a Small Planet.
Wonderful book.
Remember that book?
I read it, and that was part of the change, yes.
Yeah. And it was so influential for me because I realized that I didn't have to have a piece of chicken for my protein. I could have rice and beans.
Right.
I could have beans and something else. I could complement the plant protein, put various proteins together that were missing the complementary amino acids that the other food that I was eating didn't have, but put together they would be complete protein.
Right.
It was a revelation, and we did it for a while, but it's very difficult, and I'm sure you can speak to this, when you're working, particularly if you're working on movies in your own location, to be a vegan, to be a vegetarian. I mean, you have to, unless you're just eating, eggs and cheese all the time, if you're a vegetarian. Right. How do you function when you're away from home?
It used to be harder, if not impossible. That's why I compromised back in the 70s and started eating, other things.
Right.
Because it was difficult. But now I've been in Prague. I've been in this city, that city. Used to be Eastern Europe. You couldn't get any vegetarian. Having worked there many years ago, it was very hard to find. But now I think it's easy now to find vegetarian food, indeed vegan food, at any restaurant.
Just about anywhere.
I go to in LA, or I even discovered years ago I could make do anywhere if I wanted to. Even in the 70s, I could go to Sizzler and have the baked potato in the salad bar, and I'd be fine.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to eat that every night, just baked potato in the salad bar. But you go to a Chinese restaurant, you get stir-fried vegetables with tofu.
There you
get
go.
This and you get that.
Yeah.
Just because of my condition, I had to compromise a little bit because of my health situation. Otherwise, I'd probably still be a pure vegan.
How long ago were you diagnosed with Parkinson's?
I was diagnosed in 2016, but I've had it since 2004.
Wow.
And didn't know it. I was in such good shape physically.
Right.
And riding my bike every day, that's one of the best things you can do if you have Parkinson's, is vigorous exercise. And I'd ride up from Ventura Boulevard, where I live, up to Mulholland, and down around Franklin Canyon Lake and home, every day.
Yeah. For those of you who are listening and watching, those trips that Ed just described are arduous. Particularly
it's a steep hill going up Laurel or Coldwater, one of those. And I wouldn't go up the main road to be in traffic there. I would go up, there's a fire trail you could go up you're out of traffic. So it was easy and safe. I could do it every day without fear of somebody hitting me by accident over time.
Right. Now, the house that you're living in now, am I seeing you in the house that is totally off the grid?
It could be totally off the grid, but not if you have. It's pretty much off the grid. If there was one person living here, I suppose you could be off the grid because of the electric car charging.
Yeah.
But we have 4 cars that are charging at this, I'm going to call it green charging station, which is my home, because I make most of the power, all the power for the house I make here, and that the house would be off the grid without the electric car for sure.
Right.
But I drive an electric, my wife drives an electric, my 2 daughters drive electrics, and both of those wonderful daughters plug in here a lot of the time. So just the nature of how much, solar you can fit on your rooftop.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd have to have twice the size or 3 times the size to charge 4 cars. I've got 9 kilowatts of solar. That's enough to run the house and charge 1 car. But to charge all of those, I buy some. And now here's the important point I want the listeners to hear. You can buy power in Los Angeles as green as the solar panels that produce the power on site. That's from their green power program they have, where every dollar that you spend on buying green power, it only costs another 2 cents a kilowatt hour, I think, and I'm happy to pay it. You can get power from new solar, new wind. By that I mean, if you're buying the green power program, they buy that much green power, dollar for dollar, out there in the market from wind turbines. They put new, you're not just taking title to a hydro plant in Idaho and going, look, we have green power because you signed a document. This is new green electrons going into the grid for people that participated in that green power program. And there are several other programs like that around the country where your dollars for the green power program buy new and that's the important word, new, not existing, green electrons putting from wind or solar or geothermal from those 3 sources. So I have no guilt about charging the 4 cars because I only buy that power, late at night when it's cheap to do it anyway. Yep. And I buy it all green. I pay, as I said, I think 2 cents a kilowatt hour, maybe 3. So it's an extra $60 a month on my bill, maybe for a 2-month period. So it's $30 extra a month. And I'm happy to pay it to have the bragging rights that it's all running on green power. Long-winded explanation, but I want to be entirely factual.
Oh, that's quite all right. Please. My pleasure, because I'm a green guy as well.
You sure are.
There was another question that I had for you, which was, and this has to do with, in many ways, the overriding kind of feeling of your book, the new book. You talk a lot about the relationships that you have established over your lifetime, particularly being in show business and living in Los Angeles. Okay, you know a lot of famous people, right?
Yeah. I've been here my whole life, so yes, that's true.
But not just know them, that you have abiding and enduring relationships with a lot of these people.
That's true, actually.
And it's one of the things that struck me about the book was that when I was reading it, I was thinking, is this book I have lots of friends and I want you to know it, but it's not, because it's essentially about the community that you have established through your lifetime of people who help each other and who love each other.
That's definitely what it is in my estimation. Yeah, people like Carrie Fisher and Bruno Kirby and these dear people in my life. Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis.
Yeah, I knew Carrie really well as well. But something you say in the book that just really struck me, and it had to do with a story you tell about the sale of George Harrison's guitar. Can you share that with us?
Yes, I had the good fortune to know the Beatles. I've only met Paul McCartney. I don't really know him, but I knew George a bit. I know Ringo. I still see him. I knew John Lennon. Very lucky to have spent an evening at the Dakota with him and Yoko. But George and I would talk about the environment quite a bit. He was quite the environmentalist. A lot of people don't know that about him. But the subject of a famous guitar came up. That's what they call the rooftop guitar, if you will.
Yeah.
That guitar.
Amplify that a little bit more. The rooftop guitar. The final Beatles concert, right?
The final Beatles concert, yes, up on the rooftop at Apple Records.
Apple Records, right.
It was being sold by, I can't remember who was selling it, but somebody had sold it. I was asked to bid on the guitar for somebody that I felt should have it.
There was an auction at...
There was an auction in the San Fernando Valley.
Yeah.
But it was his wife, Olivia, and his son, Danny, that everybody thought should have the guitar. But understandably, they didn't want to go and sit there in the room during the auction and all that entailed. So I was the one that was designated to go in there and, bid on the guitar and get it for a price that we all felt was appropriate. And I did just that. So I had possession of the guitar for a full 5 minutes, and then I turned it over to the appropriate parties. But
right.
Just have it in my hands. And most importantly, to do something to do a favor for, I suppose, to give back in some small way for what those four lads gave us all. They really made my life better with their music in so many ways.
And also the fact that you were able to provide a service to serve the family, to serve George's family. And
exactly.
And that you say something in the book that really struck me. You said you felt almost like Forrest Gump or Chauncey Gardner from Being There, or Zelig, in that you are a kind of silent, invisible cog in the wheel of this great experience. And in a way, I wouldn't say that you're that anonymous, first of all, because you've had an extraordinary career. Extraordinary career.
You're being very kind, but thank you.
But it's true. And at the same time, that you have the humility to understand that it's important to help your friends, be they famous or not.
Well, that's true. That's the joy of it all, isn't it? To do that sort of thing for the people that you love.
Yeah.
And it really has nothing to do with their notoriety.
No.
It's the way they make you feel, whatever they do. Famous or not, these people, and I know many of them that are not remotely famous, but they just have made me feel so good with the way they live their lives and the way they've dealt with me and helped me over many years. It's just about helping those people, and that's what I got the chance to do with George a bit, and very happy to do it. But I feel like Zelig, that guy in the background at Yalta, what have you, that, those doctored photos from the Woody Allen movie. What's he doing here again? How did he get in here? And it was like that. I saw the Joni Mitchell documentary. I said, wow, that's great. They're at this opening for Boyd Elder's art show, what have you. And wait a minute, that's me dancing in the background. Who's that goofy blonde guy dancing in the background like a maniac? That's me.
That big, tall drink of water there.
Yeah. Very lucky to be part of that and to know these people still and see so many of them are still a part of my life. And I'm just lucky to have such good friends. Well,
they're lucky to have you, Ed. I have one more question for you, and it's the question that I ask all of my guests. And it has to do with the importance of childhood memory, of course, but also how food is such a conduit for so much of what we remember in our lives. If you're someplace and you're having a meal, or if you're sitting around in a community of people, or you're having a meal at home, and a taste or a smell suddenly, whoa, that reminds me of a moment in my childhood when I was eating this, or when I was with someone, what would that moment be?
I want to be fair with this one. Yes, it was cilantro, actually.
Really?
Cilantro. It's when I was learning to cook from Mark Lebovitz, my dear friend who's since passed. But I hated cilantro.
Yeah.
I just despised it. If something,
Not
did
unusual.
you put cilantro on this? I despised it.
Yeah.
Then one day, while helping Mark prep something, we were cooking something up. Give me some of that cilantro. Oh boy. I didn't even want to touch it, but I put it in the thing. And then he served up the thing later, and I forgot that there was cilantro in it. And then it happened. I realized I didn't hate cilantro at all. I now loved it. It was this unique, wonderful, pungent taste.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminded me of being in that kitchen at the Naked Lunch and Mark Lebovitz and learning to cook and learning to open my palate and open up my nose and everything that's involved in cooking and tasting and smelling those wonderful things. And I liked it. And now I like lots of different exotic flavors, the umami this and the sweet that and the, all the different flavors. It's cilantro that triggers that in me. And I, by the way, love cilantro. I can't get enough of it the past 40 years of my life, yes.
And it's very healthy, too, by the way.
I'll bet it is. I don't doubt that for a second.
Ed Begley Jr., thank you so much for joining us on Cooking by Heart.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. It's so good to see you.
Great to see you, too.